Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 5 of SuperSports, the review series for the vehicles of Gran Turismo 6, which are far beyond your average sports car, but not quite the level of a full-on supercar. Now this car, which is of course the Mercedes SLS AMG, one of the most popular and highly respected exotic vehicles in the world, is very similar in one way to the McLaren MP412C that we featured in last week's supercar series, Ultimate Exotics. And the way in which it is similar to that car is that this car really runs a very fine line between super sports car and full-on supercar. Now, an argument can be made really for both, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with either. But for the sake of the series, I am classifying this vehicle as a super sports car rather than a complete supercar. So, arguably this car's main rival, the car that it had to live up to when it was released, was of course the SLR McLaren, which is obviously a full-on supercar. But many people consider the SLS to be better than the SLR McLaren, and many people say that it is what the SLR should have been. Is it? Is it a better car on the game? How do the specs compare? Well, it's certainly a lot cheaper for a start. The SLR is of course over 600 grand, whereas the SLS is just under 200 grand. It's actually 198,000 credits. And for that you get a 6.2 litre supercharged V8, front mounted obviously, rear-wheel drive, that produces, when fully tuned, 884 horsepower, so more than enough to get the job done. It also produces a huge 712 pound-feet of torque, which isn't too surprising for a Mercedes. Their AMG models are known for having huge amounts of torque. Now, as far as weight, it's a lot lighter than the SLR, but still heavy for a super sports class vehicle at 1,297 kilos. It is heavier than many of the other super sports vehicles, but still not a heavy vehicle. And its power to weight ratio is a healthy 682 horsepower per tonne, which again is more than enough to get the job done around the track. Incidentally, its PP in this fully tuned state is 642, which is quite high, all things considered. But what does it have to offer from those specs, both around the track and in a straight line? Well, in a straight line, you're looking at a top speed which is actually not quite as quick as you might expect. Now, obviously, all of the exotic vehicles and most of the cars in general on Gran Turismo have top speeds that are blown way out of proportion. For instance, 300 mph plus Alfa Romeos. Yeah, right, okay. This Mercedes, however, is not that blown out of proportion. It is faster than it should be, but it's not as fast as many other vehicles in the game that have similar specs. The cruising speed without NOS or draft is around the 270 region, which isn't quite as quick as you might think. When I first bought this car, which is a long time ago now, I was expecting a top speed of around 290. Even with less power than many of the other supercars, because it's just such a strong performance vehicle. But clearly not. Now, that being said, 270 miles per hour is obviously not slow, and the acceleration is also, not surprisingly, very, very strong all round on the SLS through its entire performance range, more than enough to take on most super sports cars, and also take on many full-on supercars. But what about around the track? Because it's all well and good to have phenomenal straight line performance, but that's virtually useless if you can't take a corner. Thankfully, the SLS can. And not only can it get around corners, it gets around corners very, very quickly. Around the track, it's similar, if not faster, than the SLR McLaren, which, considering how much less power it has, is very impressive. And it's arguably easier to drive than the SLR. The SLR has slightly temperamental suspension, as we mentioned in the Ultimate Exotics episode featuring that car, but the SLS is a very forgiving car. even for a vehicle of its power. And it's very easy to tune. The settings on the car can be quite a wide spec, and the car will still tolerate those settings and respond well to them. It's not the kind of car that you have to fine-tune to a ridiculous degree to get the best out of. It's kind of like Merc's equivalent of the Nissan GT-R in some ways. It's a very forgiving, but at the same time overwhelmingly quick machine. So overall, the value for money, I would say, is fantastic on the SLR. It significantly undercuts many of the other super sports cars and supercars, but has fantastic performance for the money. And if you're looking for a brilliant all-round super sports machine, it's a very good choice to go for. It is, of course, as well a premium model, so you get the fully detailed interior, and it's just a cool car. It looks pretty good. Obviously, that's down to personal opinion, but it's just a classy, all-round machine. It has everything you could reasonably want from a super sports car, and it's really well priced. So that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.